You know what really grinds my gears?
I bought a PS5 on launch day, but I won't be buying a PS6, even though its exclusives aren't coming to PC anymore.
Stop it. Get some help.
Nobody cares what PC gamer thinks about the future of PlayStation. Let's just be real about that. This isn't some neutral take. It's a PC outlet trying to convince its own audience they're not about to miss out. Because read what they're actually saying. Exclusives might not come to PC anymore, but I still won't buy a PS6. That's not a strong position. That's someone realizing access is shrinking and trying to act like it doesn't matter. You're literally acknowledging the games might not come to your platform, and your response is to stay put anyway. That's not strategy, that's coping. And while that's happening, Sony is stacking exactly what moves consoles. Wolverine, Spider-Man 3, Saros, Intergalactic. That's not theory. That's what actually pulls people in every single generation. So cry all you want, we'll be playing games like we always do.
And of those three, which is the largest one? Is it gaming?
Gaming, yeah.
Gaming. So tell me about the gaming business.
We are always talking about PlayStation should be a best place to play from users' perspective, and at the same time, best place to publish, because we have a relationship with a bunch of third-party, game publishers, and of course we have great studios as a first party.
Here are the biggest gaming leaks and news you've probably missed this week. What makes this moment so confusing is that Sony spent years telling everyone the opposite story. Back in 2022, Sony said it wanted roughly half of its game releases to be on PC and mobile by 2025, and it backed that up with real action. Major PlayStation franchises moved to PC, Sony invested in the PC push, and by 2024, it was even rolling out a PlayStation overlay on PC with trophies, friends lists, and profile integration through titles like Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut. On the surface, that looked like a company building an actual long-term ecosystem beyond the console. That is why the current reversal feels so dramatic. Bloomberg reported in March 2026 that Sony's gaming division is pulling back from putting PlayStation games on PC, and that this shift includes no longer planning PC ports for games such as Ghost of Yoti. Bloomberg also tied the change to weak sales for recent PlayStation games on PC, and concern inside Sony that releasing games on PC can damage the value of its console business. That is not a tiny adjustment. That is Sony reasserting the old logic of the PlayStation brand, where exclusives exist first and foremost to sell the boss. And once you place that next to what Hiroki Totoki has been saying, the picture gets even clearer. Sony's own corporate reporting still describes PlayStation as the best place to play. And in its fiscal 2024 corporate report, the Game and Network Services segment explicitly frames PlayStation around premium products and services that create long-term value on console and beyond. Sony's broader strategy presentations also show that entertainment now accounts for around 60% of group sales, which reflects the company's long shift away from pure consumer electronics and toward content-driven businesses where PlayStation is one of the crown jewels. In other words, PlayStation is no longer just one electronics product line inside Sony. It is one of the company's main engines, and that makes protecting its identity far more important than chasing every possible port opportunity. That matters because Sony's problem was never simply, how do we make more money from old games? The deeper question was always whether PC ports strengthen PlayStation or slowly dissolve its reason to exist as a distinct premium platform. Xbox is the warning sign sitting right there in front of them. Microsoft made PC a pillar of its strategy and then pushed even further into publishing on rival hardware. The result is reach, yes, but also a much blurrier identity. Sony clearly looks at that and sees a risk. If PlayStation games are too available everywhere, then the brand stops meaning this is where you go for the best first-party experiences, and starts meaning you can wait. Bloomberg's reporting strongly suggests Sony has decided that trade-off is not worth it anymore. And frankly, the business case for the PC push looks weaker the more data that trickles out. A recent report on former PlayStation PC planning manager Jerry Liu's LinkedIn history said Sony's PC business generated about $300 million in net revenue from 2021 through 2023. That sounds fine until you compare it to PlayStation software sales on PS4 and PS5, which produced roughly similar amounts in a single year, not across 3. Even if you treat that comparison cautiously, it still points to the same conclusion Bloomberg reported. PC is not replacing console economics for Sony. It is not even close. If the return is modest and the risk is weakening the console's exclusivity appeal, the corporate answer becomes much easier. Then there is the quality issue, and this is where the strategy really starts to crack. Sony's PC ports have not built an untouchable reputation. The Last of Us Part 1 on PC launched badly enough that it became shorthand for a botched premium port, and even when later ports improved, the problem never fully went away. Push Square noted in 2025 that Spider-Man 2 was much better than the Last of Us Part 1 disaster, but still suffered from notable technical problems, with Digital Foundry citing intense frame time disruption and image quality compromises.
Right? It doesn't feel particularly great based on this preliminary testing.
Yeah. I was looking at the footage you sent and the screens, and I think just looking at the immediate visual, so I looked also at other user reports and compared it with what I could see visually in front of me, and a lot of people are also complaining about the fact that if you just look at the game, it looks like it's rendering incorrectly about some aspect about it. And it may be related to ray reconstruction. It may be related to how ray tracing fits into that. But when you play the game maxed out with like ray reconstruction enabled, you can already see like people's hair is flickering. A lot of shadows, just normal shadows, have tons of noise in them. There appears to be like noise also in the background of a lot of these images that you sent me here, like in the depth of field of what possibly could be ray traced ambient occlusion working. And it just didn't look very, like usually when you play a game the first time maxed out, that's the best way to play it immediately, and you don't expect immediate visual compromises that you should then have to go into your settings to turn things down that make the game look better, right? That's usually not.
That is the awkward middle ground Sony got stuck in. The ports were not disastrous every single time, but they also were not clean enough to feel like a prestige extension of the PlayStation brand. When you are charging premium prices and asking players to buy into a new ecosystem, good enough most of the time is not a winning pitch. This is also why the Nix's conversation is getting so emotional. Nix's was acquired precisely to support Sony's PC ambitions, and Sony's own studio profiles have long framed it that way. But a specialist port studio only feels strategically important if the parent company is committed to a strong port pipeline. Once Bloomberg reports that Sony is retreating from single-player PC ports, every other little signal suddenly feels louder. Fans noticed PlayStation Studios pages removing or reducing PC references in studio descriptions, while keeping Nix's as the obvious exception. On its own, that kind of website tweak would not prove much. Put next to Bloomberg's report, it starts to look like quiet alignment. The public-facing language is catching up to an internal shift that had already begun. Now, to be fair, Sony is not abandoning PC in a total all-or-nothing sense. Its official PlayStation PC page is still live. PC releases tied to the broader publishing slate still exist. Bloomberg's own reporting points specifically at a pullback from bringing over PlayStation games like Ghost of Yotei, and Push Square's summary of that report says live service games will still be ported. That distinction is important. Sony does not need to kill every PC initiative. It only needs to stop feeding PC with the exact games that give people a reason to buy a PlayStation console in the first place. In that model, PC remains an auxiliary channel for selected projects, while the core single-player prestige catalog becomes a stronger console retention tool again. And when you line up the contradictions, they stop feeling like contradictions and start feeling like the residue of an older plan that Sony has not fully cleaned up yet. DualSense support on PC, branded monitors and accessories. All of that belongs to the period when Sony was experimenting more aggressively with platform expansion. Those investments do not disappear overnight just because the company changes direction. Corporations do not pivot cleanly. They leave artifacts behind. So you end up with one hand still maintaining a PC storefront presence, while the other hand quietly decides that the biggest first-party single-player games should stay on PlayStation. That is why the messaging feels split. The strategy changed faster than the public presentation did. The Totoki angle makes the final piece of the puzzle click. When Sony says entertainment now dominates its revenue mix, and when PlayStation keeps being framed internally as the best place to play and the best place to publish, that is not vague marketing language. It is strategic positioning. In a company that has already admitted it was forced to change, as old-style electronics became harder to differentiate, PlayStation is no longer just about selling hardware volume. It is about protecting a premium entertainment ecosystem. All right, let's really slow this down and look at what's actually happening here, because the more you line everything up, the more obvious it becomes that Microsoft doesn't have a clear lane anymore. They spent years building toward one goal. They went on that massive acquisition run, bought some of the biggest publishers in the industry, and the message was simple. Xbox is going to win with content. They are going to outgun PlayStation with sheer volume, talent, and IP. That was the bet. And for a while, people bought into it because on paper, it made sense. If you own enough studios, eventually you control the conversation. But that didn't really happen the way it was supposed to. Yes, they have games. Yes, they have big names. But the kind of defining, generation-shaping exclusives that actually pull people into a platform consistently have not landed in the way they needed to. And that's where the shift starts. Instead of doubling down and fixing that core issue, Microsoft changed the definition of the game itself. Now, Xbox is no longer just a console. It's a service, a platform, an ecosystem that exists across PC, cloud, mobile, and even competing hardware. The "this is an Xbox" messaging wasn't just branding. It was an admission that the console alone wasn't enough to carry the strategy anymore. You've got Halo, Forza Horizon 6, and Gears of War landing on PlayStation 5. These are not side projects. These are the pillars that were supposed to define Xbox as a platform. So when those start showing up on a rival console, it sends a very clear signal whether Microsoft wants to admit it or not. The signal is that exclusivity is no longer the priority. And once that happens, the identity starts to slip. Even internally, you can see the contradiction. Asha Sharma talks about wanting to bring back Xbox identity, which sounds like a return to something more focused, something more defined. But at the exact same time, the actions don't match that vision. You don't rebuild identity by spreading your biggest franchises across every platform available. You don't strengthen the brand by making the hardware optional. Those two ideas clash directly. Now bring Valve into this, because this is where the pressure really ramps up. The new Steam machine is not the same failed concept from a decade ago. This is a much more serious attempt at a living room PC console. It runs Steam OS. It leverages Proton for compatibility, and it's designed to play modern PC games in a console-like environment. That's important because it means PC is no longer locked to a desk. It's moving into the exact same space Xbox is trying to dominate. So now Microsoft is competing with Sony on one side and Valve on the other, both with very different approaches. Valve has a clear identity. It's Steam. It's your PC library. It's openness with a defined ecosystem. Sony has a clear identity. It's premium exclusives. It's curated experiences. This is where you go for the best version of these games. Microsoft is somewhere in the middle, trying to merge PC and console into one thing, but without a clear boundary that tells people why that matters. And that's exactly why Sony is reacting the way it is. Because from Sony's perspective, this is the worst possible time to dilute their own identity. If Xbox is becoming a PC-like ecosystem, and Valve is pushing into the living room with a stronger version of that idea, then the one thing Sony cannot afford to lose is what makes PlayStation feel distinct. That means protecting their IP. That means making sure their biggest games still feel tied to their platform. That means pulling back from strategies that make PlayStation feel optional. The reality is, the people with real track records are not backing this PlayStation PC launcher rumor at all. They are doing the exact opposite. They are either calling it nonsense outright or pointing to Sony heading in a completely different direction by scaling back its PC plans. And that right there is the part that kills the fantasy for me. Because if the most credible unofficial voices are all pushing against it, then what are we really left with? Mostly recycled hype and people connecting dots that probably were never connected in the first place. The biggest name people keep bringing up here is Nate the Hate, or just Nate. And whether people like hearing it or not, he has built a pretty solid reputation over the years when it comes to PlayStation-related information. So when people asked him directly about this launcher rumor in March 2026, his answer was not vague. It was not coy, and it was not one of those annoying insider half-teases. He just said he was not aware of it and that it sounded like nonsense, straight up. No little wink, no maybe, no I've heard things, just nonsense. And he followed that up by saying, Sony is absolutely moving its PC strategy away from single-player titles. That is a massive detail, because that is not just him rejecting the launcher rumor. That is him pointing in the complete opposite direction. Then you have Jason Schreier. And yeah, he is not a leaker in the usual internet clown car sense. But let's be real. When it comes to actual industry sourcing, he is one of the few people left whose words still carry real weight. He has been very clear that the launcher speculation does not have real sourcing behind it. And more importantly, he has been saying Sony has already started reversing course on a lot of these PS5 single-player games coming to PC. So now you are looking at stuff like Ghost of Yotei, Saros, and even Marvel's Wolverine sitting under a cloud of doubt instead of feeding some bigger PC expansion plan. That matters, because again, it shows Sony's not gearing up for a giant PC ecosystem push. It looks more like they are tightening the walls back up around the console, people taking old scraps of evidence and stretching them until they snap. To me, this feels like the second one all day long. It is like watching people find an old construction sign from years ago and convince themselves a skyscraper is about to go up tomorrow, even though the crew packed up and left ages back. Other voices that sometimes get pulled into these conversations, whether it is certain reset-era insiders or people adjacent to the digital foundry orbit, have mostly echoed the same general point. This whole thing got inflated by random X accounts mixing old 2022 Spider-Man file references with misread icons, PSN rebranding chatter, and a bunch of assumptions that just kept mutating the more people repeated them. And that 2022 Spider-Man launcher reference? Yeah, that part was real at the time. But in industry terms, that is ancient. If there was something serious happening here, you would expect at least one credible follow-up by now from somebody with a real history. So, the latest update for Crimson Desert is here. And while it's not as massive as the previous one, it's still doing a lot of meaningful work under the hood. This feels less like a flashy content drop and more like the devs tightening the experience based on real player feedback, which honestly is exactly what the game needs right now. The biggest change right away is storage. Before this patch, the storage situation was rough. You had 240 slots, which sounded okay on paper. But once you actually started playing, collecting gear, hoarding materials, stacking armor sets you swear you'll use later, it filled up instantly. Now they've pushed that all the way up to 1,000 slots. That's not a small increase, that's almost quadruple the original capacity. But there's a catch, and it actually makes sense. It's tied to your camp progression. You still start at 240, and then every expansion adds more space, which means you're rewarded for actually investing in your base instead of just dumping everything into a bottomless inventory. It turns storage from a frustration into a progression system. Now movement. This was a big pain point before. Some people liked holding sprint, others preferred tapping for control, especially when using mounts. The old system didn't really balance that well. If you held sprint too long, stamina just vanished instantly, which felt clunky. So now they've split it into two modes. Basic is hold to sprint, classic is tap to sprint. And the important part is how mounts behave now. Holding sprint doesn't just drain everything at once anymore. It ticks down in intervals, which feels way more controlled. If you want full control, you still have classic. It's a simple fix, but it completely changes how movement feels moment to moment. Then there's the small quality of life stuff that actually adds up. You can now fast travel while moving slightly. It's not perfect yet. You still can't do it while mounted or gliding, but it shows where they're going with it. The devs already said they want to expand this further, and gliding finally feels natural. Before, you had to awkwardly tap jump again mid-air and then hold it, which always felt off, especially after chaining abilities. Now, you can just hold the button and glide. It sounds minor, but it removes that constant friction every time you jump. Then we get into customization. Headgear visibility is finally here. And yeah, this matters more than people think. Now you can choose how it behaves, always visible, hidden in cutscenes, only during combat, or completely off. It's not full transmog yet, but it's a step in the right direction. They're even planning to let you hide weapons on your back later, which should clean up the look even more. Graphically, there are improvements across the board. Foliage issues with ray-traced reflections have been cleaned up, and overall stuttering has been reduced. Console players also get upgrades. Xbox Series X now supports 4K upscaling in performance mode, and PS5 Pro users get improved PSSR sharpening and better native anti-aliasing in quality mode. It's not revolutionary, but it's noticeable, especially if you're sensitive to image clarity and stability. Then there's a bunch of smaller fixes that just make the game feel less broken. Force abilities actually work properly now. Bosses won't randomly disappear mid-fight. Jumping feels more responsive after attacks. UI improvements make shops and items easier to manage. Save and load menus are now separated, which sounds basic, but it prevents a lot of accidental mistakes. Even the minimap behaving properly at high speed is something you don't notice until it's fixed. And then there are the little touches. New armor for cats, a dedicated Abyss Nexus for Paloon, better labeling for save files. None of this is headline stuff, but it all stacks. The devs are clearly watching how people play, what frustrates them, what feels off, and then iterating fast. The game sold around 4 million copies in just a couple of weeks, so there's pressure to keep momentum going. But instead of rushing new content, they're stabilizing the foundation first. And that's usually a good sign. So now the real question is, do you prefer this approach where the devs focus on fixing and refining first? Or would you rather they start dropping big new content even if the core experience still has rough edges? Alright, this is one of those moves that doesn't look flashy on the surface, but it actually tells you a lot about where Sony is heading. Sony just announced it's acquiring Cinemersive Labs, a small UK-based company focused on machine learning and computer vision. Now here's the key thing, this is not a game studio. This isn't about pumping out another exclusive or expanding a franchise. This is deeper than that. This is infrastructure. This is Sony investing in the tech that's going to shape how games actually look and feel in the next generation. And they make that pretty clear themselves. At Sony Interactive Entertainment, the company behind the PlayStation brand, we are continually exploring new ways to push the boundaries of visual computing and deliver richer, more immersive gameplay experiences. Their whole thing is taking something as simple as a 2D image and turning it into a volumetric 3D space. So imagine that for a second. You're not just rendering worlds anymore. You're generating them, reconstructing them, adding depth and presence in ways that weren't possible before. And instead of keeping them separate, Sony is folding them straight into their visual computing group. That's their internal R&D division, the people working on neural networks, rendering pipelines, all the stuff that eventually becomes features like ESSR. You're not going to see a trailer next week saying, powered by Cinemersive Lab. This is long game thinking. This is Sony building the foundation for what PS6 visuals are going to look like. They even say it directly. Following the acquisition, the Cinemersive Labs team will join SIE's Visual Computing Group, VCG, and contribute to our broader efforts in advancing state-of-the-art visual computing within games. So, when Sean Eskeg, the director of Uncharted: The Lost Legacy, drops a photo like that, people start paying attention. The image itself isn't anything crazy at first glance. It's a cannon sitting on a cliff overlooking a coastal city. Nice view, cool shot. But then you read the caption, research, and that one word changes everything. Because in this industry, research usually means one thing. Someone is scouting, someone is building references, someone is preparing for something that isn't ready to be shown yet. Now tie that into what Neil Druckmann said not too long ago. Naughty Dog is working on another project alongside Intergalactic, and he's not fully directing it. He's more in a producer role this time. That alone already tells you this is a different kind of project, something being led by someone else inside the studio. So naturally, people connect the dots. Eskeg directed Lost Legacy. He knows the franchise. He's already proven he can carry an Uncharted story without Nathan Drake front and center. And now he's out here posting research shots of what looks like a potential new location. You don't need an official announcement to see where this is going. And let's be honest, the timing lines up perfectly. It's been years. Uncharted 4 dropped in 2016, Lost Legacy in 2017. Since then, nothing new. Just remasters, just collections, just re-releases. And the community has been waiting, not for another polished version of something they've already played, but for a new adventure. Uncharted isn't one of those franchises that just fades away. It's too iconic, too tied to PlayStation's identity, too big to sit on the bench forever. Alright, we gotta talk about Star Wars Jedi 3 for a second, because this thing just shifted from, yeah, it'll happen eventually, to, okay, wait, this is actually starting to feel real. And I mean really real. This isn't one of those situations where a sequel is just floating out there in the distance anymore. There's actual momentum now. You can feel it building. And the big thing everyone keeps circling around right now is May 4th. Yeah, that date. All of a sudden, the internet started lighting up with leaks, rumors, people connecting dots, all pointing towards some kind of reveal happening on Star Wars Day. And let's be honest for a second. If you're Electronic Arts, Respawn Entertainment, or Lucasfilm, you're not getting a better marketing window than that. It's literally a free global spotlight. You don't even need to try. Star Wars is already trending everywhere. All you have to do is drop a teaser, even just a logo, and the entire conversation flips instantly. It's basically plug-and-play hype. Now, at the same time, let's keep it real. Nothing is confirmed yet. No teaser, no logo. Not even a tiny leak that slipped through the cracks. And usually, with something this big, something leaks early. But here's the interesting part. Respawn doesn't really play that game. They stay quiet. They did it with Jedi Fallen Order. They did it again with Jedi Survivor. They don't overpromise early. They don't drag things out for years. They show up when they're ready. And when they do, it usually means the game isn't that far off. So if they randomly drop something on May 4th, honestly, that would be completely in character. But here's where things actually get interesting. And this is the part that really matters, the story. Because this third game, this isn't just another adventure. This feels like the conclusion. And everything is going to come down to where Cal Kestis ends up. If you look at where he was at the start versus where he is now, it's not even the same person anymore. He's not hiding. He's not just surviving. He's carrying responsibility now. He's protecting people. He's making decisions that actually have weight behind them. And you can feel it. He's more confident, but at the same time, way more conflicted. And that's the dangerous part, because he's not really following the traditional Jedi path anymore. He's forming attachments. He's building connections. He's choosing people over rules. And if you know anything about Star Wars, that's a slippery slope. That's how it always starts. We already saw glimpses of it in Jedi Survivor, moments where he taps into something darker, not fully gone, but enough to make you stop and think, okay, where does this go next? And that's why it feels like this third game is going to lean heavily into that internal conflict. Not just fighting the Empire, but figuring out what kind of Jedi he actually becomes, or if he even stays one at all. There's a lot of talk right now that he could go down a much darker path, maybe even lose himself somewhere in the middle of the story, and yeah, if you structure it like a classic 3-act arc, you can kind of see it. Act 1, he's still holding on. Act 2, things go off the rails, like really off the rails. And by the final act, maybe there's some kind of redemption, something selfless, something that costs him everything. And that leads to the big question everyone keeps asking. Does Cal actually make it out of this trilogy? Because timeline-wise, this story sits between Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. The Empire is still in control, no matter what happens. So this isn't a save the galaxy type ending. It's probably going to be smaller, more personal. Maybe it's about protecting a group of people. Maybe it's about building something that lasts beyond him. Or, yeah, maybe it's sacrifice. Star Wars loves that kind of ending, especially in this era. So if this does end on a bittersweet note, it would actually fit perfectly. Now, as far as gameplay goes, I don't think they need to reinvent anything. The formula already works. Combat feels good. Exploration works. Progression is solid. You don't need to tear that down, just build on it. Expand the Force abilities, add new stances, maybe open up the environments a bit more. Not full open world chaos, just give it a little more room to breathe. That's it. If you enjoyed this video, hey, maybe drop a like. It really helps a lot and tells me you want more. Subscribe for day one gaming leaks and news, and check out these videos you probably missed. Trust me, they're worth it.